Welcome to the Talk to Book program, a program which was initiated by Professor K. Hemchandra Reddy, Chairman, AP State Council of Higher Education, about roughly about 3 years back. The program is initiated only to introduce some of the good books for the present generation students, those who are not having the habit of going through the books reading, because they say that they are very much associated with their regular course curriculum or something like that, and also they are interested in the present day tech savvy components, that is YouTube or what are all the things. So the chairman has an idea introducing books through the same technological association. That YouTube channel is being was prepared, and it is being continuously, we are streaming every Friday between 3 to 4. We introduce one Telugu book or English book alternatively on Fridays. So today with us, today we are in the 154th episode of Talk the Book program, the book review of AP State Council of Higher Education. The book which is going to be reviewed is Ink Out of My Pen. The specialty of the book is the author herself, Harshitha, was a student of 6th standard when she has written the book. Now she is in her 8th standard. So it has got about 50 poems written in English on different topics, both social, psychological, and other aspects. The other surprising and different thing of this today's book review program is that is being reviewed by Jyothsna Phanija, who is a lecturer, associate lecturer in ARSD College, Delhi University in English department. She is physically challenged. She is interested in English literature. She did her PhD from IFLU, University of Hyderabad. Her research interests include feminism, disability literature, caste and literature, eco-criticism, and others. Her first poetry book, Ceramic Evening, was out in 2016, and she is preparing for her second book shortly, and the second poetry manuscript is under preparation. So she is going to review the book Ink Out of My Pen, written by this Moni Harshitha. This is 154th episode. I think it is time for us to move on to the reviewer, Jyothsna Phanija, to start the review of today's book, Ink Out of My Pen, by Harshitha Mopuru. Now I leave it to you, madam.
A very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Bhaskarji, for introducing me to this very unique kind of episode. Literature is my interest, and to review a book it gives me so much pleasure. So I'll be reviewing this book, Ink Out of My Pen by Harshita. In what way it is unique? Why people should read this book? So if we look at in what way this book is unique, the first point, as we can find, she is a young poet, a budding poet. So before publishing her poetry, she has also written few poems and they were anthologized, which is another unique thing because she had the experience of how publishing works. So she came to know, she knew about how the publishing works. So that is being reflected in this book. We can find many other books. When we read those books, we can identify that the poem or story, it is written by an amateur kind of a writer. But sometimes we get this feeling that it could be the first book. But very few writers, they write their books in a way that they have understood the whole of what is being read, what is being reviewed, in what way they can refine their thoughts. So that is being reflected in this book, Ink Out of My Pen. Not only for children, even for the adults, this book can be recommended so that everyone who wish to have a kind of interest in literature can actually learn from this book. So if we take the poetry, we can just find many definitions of poetry. Poetry, as we know, it can be treated as something, the spontaneous overflow of emotions recollected in tranquility, that we know. And other aspects, as we can just find Somerset Maugham, who says that poetry, which can be treated as a crown of literature. Or even some of the writers, fiction writers, they say that in every fiction there should be a poem. So in that way, it is not the thing that poetry is a kind of a dying art, or poetry makes nothing happen. So this is the time where we can come out of these kind of ideas. So Harshita, how she takes up the subjects, how she connects to the nature, or how she uses several elements in her poems, they not only give us a kind of instant pleasure, with this kind of a feeling that how a young poet has written, but not only that, it provides us a kind of a unique kind of pleasure to see that someone else also has noticed it. So someone else also has thought the same way. So in that way, she has written her poems. As we can just find poetry in a way, it happens to be a kind of carefully selected kind of subjects. Or we can even say that poetry is made by words, or poetry, even a writer who defines poetry as poetry is a machine made by words. So in that way, her book, or the various worlds that she presents, they help us to move along or to seek different connections of the world. So how do I get connected to myself? How do I get connected to the world? How do I understand the both kinds of connections? So these things happen to be much significant for any artist. So an artist undergoes this kind of turmoil, this kind of anguish, to arrive at a particular state where the understood connection to be reflected in the work. So that kind of work we can find in this book, where she writes about the nature, how she gets connected to the nature. So the very first poem in this collection is about her mother, where she happens to say that the mystic veil. So she uses this particular phrase, mystic veil, in this poem, which actually tells us like in what way the mother's love is something celestial we can find. We have this tendency to glorify the motherhood. In a way, it makes the women to stand into that particular aspect. One thing is, mothering is not related to the biological aspect. So it is not related to the biological aspect. So mothering is just a state of feeling. So as we can find, the gender itself, it is a state of identity. We can find the mothering can be treated as a state of feeling. So when she uses this kind of a phrase, the mystic veil, or she happens to talk of the softness of her mother's voice, we can just find that she is not glorifying the motherhood. She is just telling us the kind of not having the biological kind of feeling. Anyone who speaks to us in a softer tone, we can find it happens to represent the mother's love. So in that way, she brings in the contemporary understanding of the various social understandings. So earlier we were not questioning anything. We were accepting whatever that was coming to our way. That is how even things were. But the writers were challenging. Premchand, how he happened to use literature as a method to critique the society, the caste system, or we can find even the village aspects. All these aspects we can think of Premchand's writing, how he was critiquing them. So in that way, the writer sees the world, what's going to happen after a decade, after a century, how the world is going to be after a century. Who is going to know that? A writer can know that. So that is how we can find all these writers. Even Gurjad Apparao in Telugu literature we can think of. He happens to envisage the future, how the world is going to be. Like we can think of Guram Joshua's poetry in Telugu, we can think of. He has questioned, and he happens to use such metaphors, such abstractness, such concreteness he was using, which actually can be related even now. So such kind of resistance we can find in Harshita's works, where she happens to establish the sense of connection to the world. So in that way, we can say that she happens to talk of one poem where she titled it as "The Doctors Are Saviors." So in this particular poem, she happens to talk of the doctors who were helping everyone during the time of pandemic. So in this way, we can find the child's voice happens to come out. So how the child was responding to it. So everyone, they had their own kind of version when it comes to the understanding of the pandemic, because it is historical truth, and we can find every individual has experienced the pandemic in different way, in the cultural, in the social, in the linguistic, or even in terms of migration. In every level, an individual has experienced it. There was no individual who hasn't got the experience of the pandemic, not the kind of medical kind of experience, but the social kind of experience. We can just find the social aspects of the perception towards pandemic. So in that sense, we can find when she writes about the doctors, it reflects on how the poet becomes sensitive towards the world. So we can find she also happens to talk of this aqua queen, the river. So even the kind of titles she uses, aqua, queen. So even the various syllables, like we can just find a river, how it flows. It happens to flow with one set of speed at one point. It happens to stream at one point. Sometimes it just rests for a while for the people to have a dip. So in that sense, we can find the title itself when she says Aqua Queen River. In that itself, we can find she graphically she represents the flow of the river. So in this particular work as well, in this particular poem as well, she gives us the painting of the work. Like a poet who happens to define poetry as poetry is a painting uh, which doesn't speak, and painting should speak. So painting, usually it is thought that it doesn't have a voice. It has colors, shades and techniques, but it should speak. And poetry, it should present the unspeakable, in the sense it has the words, even then it should have the silence. So poetry is something where the silence is created with the words. So that is what she tries to capture. This book, it is a kind of a companion for every individual who seeks a kind of a solace, because she happens to talk of like laughter, in what way it can energize a person, in what way one can come out of depression. So in that sense, we can find the poems have the maturity. There is another great book which is called Poetry with the Young People. And this book is published in 2007. And this book is edited by Gav Patel. And this book is an anthology by the people who were attending the poetry workshop at the Rishi Valley School, which is nearer to this area of in the border of Andhra and Karnataka. So there were students from different regions, and this poet gave Patel, he was doing the workshop for a decade. So in the sense, we can just find the understanding of poetry, how it was working. So in 2007 itself, so at that time he started, he has written in his introduction that initially he was also thinking the young people, already they will be having their own kind of curriculum. They will have sports and other activities. So would they enjoy poetry? Would they be bringing up their ideas? These were the questions. So when he has written this, when he has started this workshop, he found that few students were attending the workshop every year. So over the course of 6 years, he has anthologized these poems. Anyone can read this book as well, and this book is edited and praised by many prominent Indian poets like Eunice D'Souza and others. In this introduction, he talks of, Gabe Patel talks of three important things. I wanted the children to write the poems which are not like fairy tales. So why does he say that? Because it just reinstates the same feeling, same thing, that young people are interested in fairy tales or something magical. Then the second aspect he happens to talk of is he happens to say that the poems to be written which could or which are not a kind of in the sense like which are not having or not representing the exactness of the child's world. So then we can also find the third and important aspect what he happens to talk of is the poems which are not taking the kind of aspects which are present everywhere. So in that way, something unique, something which is not to do with the fairy tales or happy ending kind of Cinderella stories. So we need a space for that. So in that way, Harshita's work, Ink Out of My Pen, it has these three aspects, and it doesn't present the fairy tales. It happens to actually it glorifies the earth itself. So there is another poem where she happens to invite the sun, the moon, the stars, and they say that you can all come to the earth and you can seek the beauty of the earth. So in that sense, she is not projecting the magical kind of world where we should leave this present world and move to the other world, but she presents the aspects of the other world, and she says that you all should come to the earth so that you can actually enjoy or you can know what's happening on the earth. So in that way, we can just find she presents the aspects of the fairy tales. So in that way, we can find that there are few young poets like Harshita who are writing. Like we have the other poet as well, like Agna. So we can find Agna Yami, and she received the World Book of Records as well. At the age of 5, she has written this poetry collection in Malayalam, which is called Vanapattam, which means the colored kite. So this child, she was in KG. At the time itself, she was writing. And now we can find she has written her own collection in Malayalam. So such kind of beauty we have in our language. So young poets like Harshita, so over the course of years, she has written this book. She would have edited, rephrased, and so much of pain would have taken place when she would have compile this collection, because she knows music as well and she knows paintings as well. She is artistic. So that's why we can find in her poems that kind of rhythm is handed, it is projected and maintained throughout the collection. So we can find the young people are much interested in writing, interested in reading. So the young people, or we can find the children, they have this tendency when they speak as well. We can just find they speak with the kind of poetic tone. When I observe my children and children of my friends and relatives, then I find that children, they have the innate talent. The poet is flourishing. Only thing is that flourishing poet should be given importance, should be noticed, and should be taught how to be written. So all the schools and even the parents as well could invest their time in making their children acquainted to literature. So these days we have this kind of complaint from the parents saying that my child is interested in watching movies, or my child wants to spend more time on TV. I can't find any other way to reduce the screen time. The solution can be introducing these kind of work. So if this kind of a work like ink out of my pen be given to a child and asked to be read, then the child will understand. Then it would help the parent as well, so that the screen time can be reduced. What happens is we give the book to the children and we tell them to read, but the children want to be listened when they read. How do I read? Listen me and tell me. That is what they ask. Am I reading properly? And what's the meaning of this word? Can I put this word in other context? Can I read this poem from the last line towards the first line? These kind of questions the children will ask when we sit with them and ask them to read. So in that way, we can inculcate the reading habit among young children. We have the simplest solution with us. Only thing is, we just have to reinforce it. That is why I always suggest everyone, make your children read works. In our very own Indian literature is rich with poetry, rich with fiction, rich with the literary aspects. More than more than a dozen films, one book can teach many things to the child. Because if a film is being shown, or if a game or some kind of video is being shown, they may not get enough time to pause and think. But literature makes a person to pause for a while and think and get connected to the environment. So we can, not only that we have the poets from the West. So literature, in the sense the poets who have written, or we can find the context of the English aspects. Like we can find Gave Patel, who says, don't write about daffodils. We don't find daffodils in India. So write about something which you see, like jasmine or rose, something which you see. So in that way, we can just find, we can ask the children to read literary works which are written by the Indian poets. Like Sangam age, we can think of. Many poets have written, many poems happen to be written in Sangam age. The poems which are written in Tamil, they happen to be translated by the English translators. Kannada folk tales we have. And A.K. Ramanujam, how he has translated them. And we can think of many other poets, even Telugu literature we can think of, it is being translated. The child gets connected to this kind of work. And even in Harshita's ink out of my pen, she doesn't enforce the false consciousness. So she doesn't talk of daffodils. She doesn't talk of something which she hasn't seen. She talks of something which she and all of us would have seen. So there is this poem in which she happens to talk of the things outside my door. Again, to which aspect it alludes to? It alludes to the lockdown period. We didn't have anything to do with except to stare what's happening at the outside. So there were the birds, the music of the birds, or the music of the wind, or things which one can see from the outside of the door, and she happens to talk of that in her works. So in that sense, we can find she happens to talk of in what way we can establish this kind of connection. So the things which are familiar to us. So from her school space, how she shares the lunch box with the other students in the school, how she happens to get suggestions from her father, how she happens to get support from her teacher. So that's why even in the poetry collection, so she first poem is dedicated to her mother, then the second poem to her father, then to the teacher. In that sense, she happens to talk of everyone who is part of her world. Then she talks of the nature, the farmers, how they happen to help, or how even they are much connected to the earth. So these are the aspects she happens to talk of. Every child, every individual can actually visualize themselves in these poems. And even the musical aspects we can find in these works. Like in what way everything that is related to the nature, it produces the music. The rain, the splashing of the rain, the traveling of the river, all these aspects, even the music of the laughter. So in that way, we can find she happens to talk of like in what way the music can be retained. Also, we can think of the way she happens to arrange the lines or even the rhythm, the specific words she happens to use, where she says like, when I feel under the weather. So feeling under the weather, usually this expression in the contemporary times, like sometimes like we don't use, but children use, because children retain their kind of innocence. We can just find the entitled kind of innocence. So that entitled innocence, which is part of the child's world, we can just find that it happens to be represented when she uses this kind of a phrase which is not being much used in the contemporary kind of writing. So we can find many of the contemporary poets, they happen to play with the words, the spellings, or the capitalization in between a word. The in between letters happen to be capitalized to indicate or to give the emphasis to a particular aspect of a particular word. Like we can take the word umbrella, and we can just find it has two E's. And if these two A's are capitalized, it produces the graphical kind of aspect. And it just gives us the experience becomes capitalized. Like we can think of many contemporary poets, like we can think of, for example, Jyothsna. In what way he uses the contemporary experiences, like how he happens to talk of the language itself. So in that sense, we can just find the poet happens to love the language. An individual who loves the language will create the poetic kind of works. So that we can find with Harshita's writings, because she happens to explicate that kind of love she has for words. So that is how she happens to call the mother nature. Or even we can think of the crisis we had. So not only we can just find the pre-pandemic times, pandemic time and post-pandemic kind of times, we can just find it. It gives us enough space for the ecological consciousness. So, as one of my research interests is also ecofeminism, or we can say eco-criticism, and how ecology is related to literature. If we try to understand, like in what way ecofeminism comes to the point, so usually people happen to view ecofeminism as something which establishes the connection to women to nature. So it is viewed that women happen to be self-giving, selfless, they are nurturers, they have the ability of mothering, and they are selfless. Even nature, we can think of rain, forest, trees, or we can think of any other aspect of the nature which is constantly giving, which is also like the mother, or we can just find in that way both are similar, nature and the women. So that is what ecofeminism, it happens to be the general view. But what is ecofeminism, or if we simplify it, when we don't go to the scholarly engagement with ecofeminism, we can say that ecofeminism is what, it just tells us that in what way both women and nature happen to stand as independent entities, in what way they both happen to be abused, or in what way they do their portion, or there is no need to glorify the aspect of self-giving. As long as we glorify it, as long as we say that the earth is self-giving, the earth is, it doesn't say anything. As long as we say that the forests are for us, they're self-sacrificing, like the tree gives everything for us. We have to learn from the tree. So as long as we hold this kind of a view, we take the nature for granted. So we get tuned to this kind of a view that the tree gives us everything. It doesn't ask anything. Actually, we use this kind of presumption to make ourselves feel comfortable, and to make an excuse, to give an excuse to us to cause the destruction to it. When we get this feeling that women are self-giving, mothers are self-giving, when we glorify them, we happen to put them in the complex position where they can't rebel against their imposed gratifying kind of self. So that is why ecofeminism stresses that let us not glorify women or nature. Let us understand that they are not self-giving. They too, we too have our part against the preserving of it. Like we can even think of the women who work in the factories. We can just find they are subjected to several diseases which are related to the uterus, which are related to the women's specific kind of health. So in that way, they were to work in specific factories which are aimed at the destruction of the nature, and they are subjected to their health hazards as well. So that is how ecofeminism comes to the picture. So we can find in that sense, even Harshita's works, we can think of, she doesn't glorify the role of women or the role of nature, or she doesn't position the natural aspects in the gratifying kind of position, but she simply observes the nature around her, and she happens to talk of it or presents whatever she observes. And all these poems are shorter, and she doesn't deliberately uses alliteration, or she doesn't use the artificial consciousness or even assonance. In the sense, if the form comes to her poetry, it comes in a natural way. So she doesn't force poetry to it. So in one line, if we have to substitute how she writes, we can find she doesn't force poetry to her thoughts. It happens to happen in a natural kind of way, where she happens to position it in a way where there is no fixed rhyme, or even we can say that there is no fixed alliteration or fixed assonance or meter. So in that way she happens to write. So that is why if this book is given to the children specially, they would understand. When they read, they get this feeling that maybe I can also write this way. In that way, the better world can be established. When every child gets connected to the nature, like even we can say, Harshita happens to say city life, the aspect of the city life, how nature brings the solemn or even the graceful aspect of the city life. So in what way we can find the graceful aspect of city life is through nature. So that is why we can find, when these kind of books are given to the children, when the children are introduced to these kind of works, they would be able to understand in what way the grace is added, or in what way the city life gives the aspect of the nature. There is no rule that we have to criticize every aspect of modernity, or even in a short story which is written in Telugu. It is written in 1991. Uh, in that short story itself, the writer, he says, let us enjoy the sweetness of the modern life. Right? There is no particular aspect that the modern life is bitter. It has its own sweetness. Like we can find the modern life, it gives enough space for everyone. It happens to give a new view to oppression. Like people like Maya Angelou, we can think of. She happens to talk of the aspect of slavery, the African American experience. So if we take this kind of simple kind of a poem like Caged Bird, in that she happens to talk of like in what way freedom can be treated as a privilege, or if freedom is being a privilege to few people, and how few people are not having the privilege of freedom. In that way, the city or the modern life, it happens to give the equal voice to everyone. It has its own kind of sweetness. So even the architecture we can think of, or even the modern aspects of the painting we can think of, even the language, it is being dismantled and it is being used in different ways. Like poetry itself, like we can just find poetry should be listened with the eyes. We have to listen to poetry with our eyes, and we have to see the poetry with our ears. So we have to listen the poetry with our ears, and we have to see the poetry with our ears, and we have to listen to the poetry with our eyes. In that way, we have to disassociate the aspects of the senses. So in that way, modern life has its own kind of sweetness. So that is why we can find this poetry collection, which is written very recently, and it is available on Amazon as well, and it is available at other platforms as well. It is widely available. So in this book, we can find she happens to talk of the joy that we can find in the kind of the structure that we are living in. There is no kind of credit, or there is no aspect of being romanticizing the pessimistic aspect, that everything is upset or everything is bitter in one's life, right? Sometimes every individual should be able to seek the good or something, the beauty of the contemporary life. So in that way, this poetry collection, it captures the or it actually teaches every individual to understand, learning to love one's own life. So in that way, we can just find when she uses these kind of phrases, or we can just say how she takes everything which is connected to her world, like the school books, the school bag, or the other aspects like the school gate, the school building, or the home, or even the people around her, the friends, or she calls the nature as her friend. So she happens to call her uh, even canine companion. She has written a poem about the love of the dogs. So in that way we can just find that she creates this kind of familiar world. So familiar world is presented in the familiar context, but with the unfamiliar choice of the words, unfamiliar kind of sensory experiences. Through her poems, she tries to evoke all the senses, like the sense of listening, or the sense of visualizing, the imagination, in what way it is great. So in that way we can find she tries to present all these aspects of the imagination. Like in this collection which I have earlier discussed in relation to ink of my pen, the poetry collection we have, the poetry for the young people, which is edited by Jeev Patel, which is published in 2007. There were these young poets who got anthologized, and the way they write these works, we can just find how come the child is reimagining or redefining the word. And there is one poem in this collection which is written by this poet called Pranav Pandit. So in that poem, this child, he writes, people tell me to seek a psychiatrist, and he writes, it is better to be insane rather than narrow-minded and material thing. Imagine these kind of lines are written by a child. So he writes this way that it is better to stay insane rather than being materialistic and narrow-minded and mechanical thing. Right? In that way he writes. And there were other poets as well. So we can just find they write about several things. Like a poet, she writes about a girl who was taken out from an orphanage and who is given the outside world, and she regrets, and she says she doesn't find peace anywhere, either in the orphanage or in the outside world. And this poet, she writes that hope in heaven, in paradise, I will get the true friendship. So the children, we can find that there is no scarcity for the talent of the children. This is what we have to mark, and we have to in the sense, like if we have this kind of a feeling that children, they may not know this, children, they may not understand it, even schools, if they have this kind of a feeling that children, they may not able to grasp it. So in the sense, when we teach poetry to the children, we shouldn't simplify the poems. We have no need to simplify the poems for the children. They would actually simplify things for us, because the children, we can find that they have this innate kind of feeling. I don't have this kind of a view that children of the present generation are capable of reading, understanding, and writing literature. Children at the ancient times as well, we can find they were being more precautious. Also we can just find they were gifted with so much of talent, and they were getting the opportunities as well. And contemporary poets like Harshitha and others, we can find they happen to tell the world once again that we have so much of talent with us, and if we get the appreciation which is genuine, or we can say, don't read our books not because we are children, but read our books because we have something potential to communicate. So these collections, they tell this kind of a thing. We have to read this kind of works not because of the book is being written by a child. A child has written this kind of work. No, the work can't be simplified that way. But at the deeper level, at the philosophical level, we can find that because they have something potential or something which we haven't heard of, or we in a more simplified way, what I can say is these works, they actually don't or they erase our identity as an adult reader, or even they don't stress on the identity as a child. So the identities happen to be erased, the child's identity or the adult's identity, then these kind of works happen to be written. So that is why we have to read these kind of works, not simply that because a child is in the sense like the children may not have the rich vocabulary, or the children may not know to use the words, but because the children have, or in a way, there is no identity of the child in all these poems. We can find that it happens to be the communication of a matured kind of individual, or a grown up individual communicating or drawing her canvas of experiences, drawing the canvas of her observations, and making the readers, or inviting the readers to participate. So this book gives everyone the participatory kind of experience. So because every poem is a shorter one, and we can find the poem, most of the poems, they invite the rereading, and most of these poems are written in a simpler kind of words, and the carefully chosen words, we can say. So that is why we can find that there is no way that the child is showing the proficiency of the words, but the child is showing the proficiency of the experiences, or the proficiency of recording the observations. Like we can find Wordsworth happens to talk of like poetry can be written in the rustic language, where people can understand, or the language to be spoken by the ordinary men in their conversations when they are at leisure. So this kind of collection, it gives us the voice that the collective experiences that we can think of when we are speaking to someone at leisure. So that kind of imagery we can find in these works. So we can also say that in defining her experiences, or bringing the reader to visualize her imaginative sphere, she she uses this kind of figurative kind of aspects, like even though she uses personification when she talks of nature, or she uses metaphors, and she also uses few similes, but they are not at all imposed to refine her kind of writing. So it is like Harshita's version of the world, or her version of her observations. So in that sense, we can say that the book happens to be written. So we can just think of the other like people who happen to be interested in other artistic aspects as well. They have this tendency to understand pain around them. The poet responds to the world around that individual. So that is why we say that keep your ears and eyes open, so that you will know what's happening around you. So that is why she responds to every form of oppression in these poems. Not only the displacement caused by pandemic, the depression and anxieties caused by pandemic, But the understanding that pandemic has brought about, the metaphorical aspect of the lockdown, or even her own sense of understanding of the world, or we can just find the world view, we can find she happens to use in these works. So when we take Wordsworth's proposition, that when he happens to say that a poet should contemplate and choose the kind of material which is relevant. So we get endless observations, we get endless images. Like we can think of, for example, something like the clouds. Then we say that when we use the black clouds or blue veil of the clouds, then we can say that people already know. That is what Jeev Patel writes in this anthology. Says the sky is in blue, that we all know. Don't use these kind of cliche experiences. The the rock, it is harder. The snow, it melts. The snow, it is white in color. The rose, it symbolizes love. So these are the experiences which are known to everyone. So umbrella has 7 colors, so don't write about it. So he says that. So in that sense, we can find we don't take everything that comes to our mind when we write a poem. So if we see the clouds, initially we may get the observation that clouds as the blue whale. Then we, what we do, we refine it. We happen to select only one image out of these 100 images. So when we select the cloud, a single aspect of the cloud, it stands. Then we think, we meditate. Then we may get this kind of a phrase like a cloud on a paper. Then we just find that this kind of image, in what way it can be expanded. So we go back to the previous aspects, or we can think of, we move to the, we can find that, then we just find that a dying cloud on a paper. So in that sense, we find that in that way, we write the poems. So in a way, it is when Wordsworth says the poetry to be written with the kind of rustic imagery, we can say that it is closer to the folk songs, the Indian folk tradition. Several traditions we have in even the regions of Andhra and Telangana, we can think of several folk art forms. What does the folk artist do? To collect the collective experience of everyone, to get the hold of the spontaneous powering feeling, the rustic imagery, and written in the conversational style. That is what we can find when Harshita happens to refine the imagery that she gets. And that aspect of what Wordsworth calls the selection, the refined selection of images, or even what the aspect we can find with the Indian folk aspects as well, we can just find it appears that the imagery, it speaks in a kind of continuous aspect, like the particular poem like Aqua Queen River. So the word aqua itself is musical, and we can find that if certain words, they create the rhythm or musical aspect with themselves. So these words we can find they become favorite words. So in that sense, we can find this particular poem, she uses this kind of method of natural selection and presents the aspects in the or the observations in the conversational style. So that is why we can find that this collection gives, or it leaves many good memories. Like we can find when she invites the stars to have the feast, to have the breakfast, to when she canvasses the sky, or when she happens to talk of the mountains, almost all the aspects of the nature she happens to take, she happens to picture them, and she gives the aspects which are related to the kind of the natural understanding of the world. So as we can find, even Wordsworth says that poetry can be written. Of course, the contemporary poets, they have their own kind of view. So they write several things. Like we have this collection which I was talking of, G. Patel edited one, the collection poetry for the young people. A boy has written about a poem about dustbin, how it stands, how it makes a creaking sound when we open and close it. Right? We may not look at it in that way. We have the kind of horrific kind of image, or we feel disgusted. We may not be willing to imagine the dustbin itself, but a poet has written about it. Right. So, in that sense, we can find every individual has their own kind of sense of writing. So, particularly Wordsworth, he gives the emphasis that the natural imagery can be taken, and even the folk art forms, we can say that they contain the natural elements. So we can say she inculcates, she imbibes, or she restructures the natural elements in all these works. Like when she happens to call, or sometimes like we can find she uses the aspect of monologue, and sometimes it is a long soliloquy. Sometimes she talks to many people. Sometimes she talks to herself. Sometimes she just listens, she doesn't talk. So in that way, the poetic voice is being recreated and rearranged in this collection, in this kind of work. So we can find what we can just find is, because of its richness in the selection, in the aspect of how we handle the image, right? The imagery is handled by the poet. It is taken care, like the petal, like a poet writes that poetry is nothing but it is like publishing a poetry book is like dropping the petals of a rose and waiting for its echo, right? Imagine the echo of flower petals when they are dropped on the ground. Would they make any kind of would they make voice? Would they make silence? So that is how, when a poetry collection is published, it is like a poet waiting for the echo of fallen petals. So in that sense, we can just find she has given her work to us, and we have to understand the echo of it, because it contains the aspects of eco criticism, and it happens to talk of the memory, or how she remembers, how she uh, reconnects to the world which she has seen, or how she reacts to the pandemic. So in that way, we can say that it happens to be a must read kind of a collection for everyone. I strongly recommend this book to everyone. It is very much available, widely available, and it is rich with the cover page as well. A beautiful cover page we can find of this book, and we can just find that she would have taken a lot of time in bringing out this collection. So it is not that written in a kind of hurry. All the imagery, all the aspects of the poems, they are so tranquil. So to get the tranquility and to experience the tranquility of the world, I recommend this book to everyone, and I thank once again for giving me this privilege to talk of my favorite book. I have read this book almost 4 to 5 times. every time it gives me a new kind of feeling. Then when I read it for the fifth time, then I just feel, oh, how come I didn't know about it when I have read for the fourth time? So every time it opens a new perspective, a fresh perspective. So I recommend this book to everyone. Thank you once again
Thank you,
for
madam.
giving me this opportunity.
Really nice of you. Thank you. Because the basic thing, so many poems felt like not written by a young student. So it
Yes.
was very, very well written, and that presentation of the importance of poetry, especially in English, you have illustrated in for the best of our students. We thank you for presenting a simple yet very beautiful book for our students on this Friday Talk the Book program. On behalf of AP State Council of Higher Education, I thank you for being with us for the Talk the Book program. Thank you, madam.
Thank you.